Hello and welcome to Mark My Words. This is Mark Homer. This is an open Q&A session. We went out to our Facebook community, the Progressive Property Facebook community, and asked you guys what you would like answering. So question number one is, hi Mark, if you were starting out in property today, where would you start? Well, I probably wouldn't start in a much different place to where I did do. I mean, I'd sort of can the overseas and off-plan and new build and all that sort of stuff that, you know, didn't really work for me. But I would probably get straight into buying good, solid, sort of terraced house, single let stock. If it was around here in Peterborough, it would be the ex-council type locations. Try and keep it probably below 130,000. Try and keep the yields above 6.5%. And I'd just start buying some of those to cut my teeth. Probably within 5 properties, I would move into room lets. I'd do HMOs to try and increase the cash flow. And then, you know, within another 5 of those, I'd probably move into doing commercial buildings and converting them into residential. So that would either be into apartments or into cluster flats, which, you know, I like doing because you can get really, really good cash flow, very high yields, and you get to keep them. And that's at the core of what I believe in and what I like to do. I like to buy and then hold, because, you know, when you sell, you've only then got to go and do the work all over again, pay a load of capital gains tax or corporation tax when you sell, stamp duty when you buy, and then you've got to keep on working to sort of stay alive. Whereas if you sort of build a really nice portfolio, yes, you know, you'll get less from the income than you will selling, but over the long term, it will just keep dropping in no matter what you do. And I think there's a lot of power in that. Okay, so question number 2. What's your prediction for interest rates over the next 2 years? I think they're going to be relatively static. You're probably going to see, obviously this is dependent on the age-old Brexit and the uncertainty surrounding that, and also around where the US is going, and Europe and China as well. Clearly the world is starting to slow down. I did a video at Christmas about this. The yield curve, i.e. the amount of the return that you'll get on long-term bonds, dipped to below the level you'll get on short-term bonds around Christmas, which shows that a lot of investors think that the market's not going to be getting any better over the next sort of year or two. That's the sort of global economy. And clearly there's a slowdown in China, a slowdown in the US. Will that translate into a full-blown recession? Well, nobody knows. I think the likelihood is that it may be more of a slowdown rather than a full-blown recession at this point. And then, of course, in the UK, you've got national, localised issues of uncertainty around Brexit. Companies not investing as much, and people not wanting to invest because they're worried about their jobs, even though unemployment is at a record low, and they're worried about what's going to happen post-Brexit. So I think at some point that Brexit uncertainty is going to lift, and clearly the fog will go away when there's some sort of deal done. Will that be at the end of March? I think it's probably quite unlikely the way things are looking at the moment. Will they kick the can down the road? I think that is quite likely. I suspect they'll end up extending because I guess a lot of the MPs are not going to vote for this deal. I think the market has decided, and most big investors have decided, that a no deal is not actually going to happen. It could still happen, but I think the likelihood is that the government will buckle and probably extend, which may be better for the economy anyway. So what's going to happen to interest rates in that period? Well, it deals with the next year, doesn't it? So I doubt you're going to see anything more than a quarter point, maybe half a point rise over the next year. Internationally, governments are trying to get interest rates back up again, with difficulty, especially in the UK. Obviously, the US is a lot further ahead on their sort of cycle and their cycle of interest rate increases. They're more into the 2% range, whereas we're at 0.75%. But with all this coming up, you can't really see them going anywhere. In the next sort of 1 to 2 year time frame, if this uncertainty reduces, as it could do, and the market suddenly starts to go, not that we haven't got economic growth, it's still about 1.5%. GDP is probably increasing by about that level. But you will see this wall of money come back to the market when that lifts. We saw this in 2013, 2012, 2013, after the last recession. Lots of people have been sitting on their hands. Lots of companies had sort of put money in the bank, waiting to invest. As soon as they were sure what was going to happen, they deployed that money. And I think there's a lot of money out there waiting to be deployed right now, whether it's consumers, companies, or even foreigners, foreign direct investment internationally into the UK. I think that will start to roll. Beyond a year out, well, things could really start to pick up, depending on those factors. But I suspect in the next couple of years, rates aren't going to be above 1.5–2% in terms of base rate. Out further from the 2 year time frame, Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, says the new normal for UK Bank of England base rate is about 2.5% to 3%. So that's where he's trying to get back to. So you should really assume that beyond that time frame, that is where we're going to get to. But whether we will or not, nobody knows. All those people that make predictions, the vast majority, if not all of them, over the long term, sometimes they get it right initially, but over the long term, they're usually wrong. I've just learnt that whilst you should keep an eye on this sort of stuff, and you're obviously going to have a view, you're taking out a variable rate mortgage or a fixed rate, I think it's better to try and control the things that you can actually control and have an effect over. So buy property that's very, very high, cash flow, don't over leverage, maybe have some fixed rate mortgages in there. I think if you can control all that stuff or focus on controlling it and keeping it in line, then all these other vagaries like interest rates, like GDP growth, like what banks are going to do, things you really can't predict and can't control, well, they should be okay as long as you've not sort of taking your eye off the ball and you're generating enough cash flow in your portfolio and you're preparing for these sort of downturns, which inevitably will come. We're going to have another sort of dirty Great Recession. I'd say we're in the second half of this cycle. Maybe we're sort of 8 years in. The last cycle was 18 years. Will this cycle be 18 years? Definitely not. It'll be a sort of different length, but I suspect we are in the second half of this game. So you could imagine in the next 10 years another full-blown recession is pretty likely. So you should get ready for that. Doesn't mean you want to stop investing. It just means you may be bid a bit lower and you're a bit more defensive, create a bit more cash flow. You want to keep a good chunk of cash back, A, to look after yourself when that happens, but B, and this is what I'm particularly interested in, I just want to go out shopping again, because 2009, 10, 11, whilst it was difficult for lots of people, and that's not a great thing, there were a lot of commercial buildings that were very, very cheap, and they've gone up a lot since the last recession, but I think that will all come round again, and there's going to be some great opportunities for you to go out and purchase. Okay, so question number 3. How did you know Rob Moore was going to be a good JV stroke business partner? Did you trust him completely from the start? What should I look for and how do you completely trust them? Well, I think it's a really good question, and I get this question a lot, and I think I've worked out the right answer over the years. So for me, I got to work with Rob for at least 6 months before I went into business with him. And for me, that is the precursor. There are lots of sort of, models you can use, lots of spreadsheets and, maybe this person's a star and maybe you're a deal maker or maybe, you're an accumulator and maybe that works together. And that's a good starting point. But I think you've got to get into working with a potential business partner. Usually they're not a friend. I've seen that work rarely. I've never really had great sort of business, let's just say business partnerships with any of my friends. I think you really need to pick your business partner on the basis that you guys are going to add value to each other, i.e., Rob and I were opposites. He's a great salesman, he's a great marketeer, and he's brilliant at sort of building these teams and creating creating some great leverage around that. Rob's great at all the things that I'm not. I love sort of buying property. I love analysing deals, finance, economic stuff. Sales and marketing really are not my bag. So that worked really well. And I think if you can find somebody like that who is, a foil to sort of what you're good at, I think that's a good starting point. Then you get to know them. I'd enter into some sort of maybe loose business arrangement with them. Don't jump all in initially. That's what Rob and I did. We rolled for sort of 6 months. When we started our business, we didn't pile a load of money in. We started with just a few £100s, so the risk was pretty low actually. And then we went out, we got investors, and we started rolling it like that. I did put some money in to buy properties for Rob and myself, but then I remortgaged them out afterwards. Initially, I just sort of I was doing all the deals, I had all the control over that. So that gave me confidence, and we got to learn what each other was going to do, what we were good at, over a period of time, that sort of, you build confidence and you build trust. And I don't know, what are we now? We started together sort of in business, in progressive property at the end of 06, beginning of 07. So, if you work that out, we're sort of 12, 13 years in, which is clearly great, and it's worked. But I've kissed a lot of frogs to find Rob, and I expect you may have to do the same. That's the reality. Number 4, would you prefer 10 buy-to-let properties producing £2,500 profit, or one SA unit producing £2,500 monthly profit? Okay, I get it. I think if it was just a clear binary choice like that, I'd probably go with the 10 buy-to-lets. And I tell you why. I know it would be more, or potentially more work, or definitely more work to source them and set them up. But those 10 buy-to-lets, if they're worth, let's say, 120,000 each, you've got £1.2 million worth of property. Let's say in 15 years' time that doubles. You've therefore got equity of 1.1 million, plus any equity you generated when you bought and refurbished and remortgaged in 15 years' time. So that's £1.1 million worth of equity that you won't have in the SA unit. If you own the SA unit, you own, I don't know, 150 grand flat. Maybe that's doubled, and you'll have made 150 grand out the capital growth in that. So I think it's a balance. I think SA is great. I think it's quite a defensive strategy. I think if there's issues like I was talking earlier on about interest rates go really high, or there's a big recession or a big downturn, I think, if you're making £2.5 grand a month out of one unit, that you're going to be all right. It doesn't really matter where interest rates go, I wouldn't have thought. The bank may ask for the money back, but you on that basis, you can probably remortgage relatively easily. So I think it's a balance. I think you need properties which are going to, you need a good rump of capital. You need to make sure that the value of your portfolio is a good number, so that capital growth will have a good effect, on your portfolio and make you a multi-millionaire over time. And then, I think you need cash flow as well to look after today and to protect you in the short term. Question number 5. I want to learn the basics of business finance. Where should I start? Good question. Where should I start? I'm very much one for learning on the job. So clearly I went through some sort of training processes. We run multiple streams of property income. Rob and I have got quite a few books. So if you have a look at Property Investing Secrets, that's a good book on, you know, financing property and how to source them and all that sort of stuff. I think once you've sort of cut your teeth, you've got the early building blocks, maybe that's masterclass, I would get into doing your first deals. You need to get out there, you need to talk to loads of agents, and to learn the fineries of business finance, I think you need to talk to a lot of banks, and you need to get lots of mortgages, and you need to talk to lots of people who've got those mortgages, because I think that is the reality. Some of these books that I read are written by people who don't take out a lot of business finance, and they're quite theoretical. You know, that doesn't just apply to that sort of sphere. You know, it's lots of books I read. So I think you need to learn from people who are actually doing it and do it yourself on the job, because I think that's where the reality comes from. Number 6. What is the best structure for a joint venture buy and hold to protect yourself and your creditworthiness if the other person turns out to be a problem? Well, okay, so I think if we rewind a few questions back to sort of, you know, getting to know somebody, dating them for a while before you get married to them, I think that's the first thing you need to do, because you absolutely don't want to be anywhere near anyone who is going to affect your credit rating. Because if you go and get mortgages, whether it's in a limited company or, you know, joint personal mortgages, there is going to be a connection of financial association between the two of you, and that may be difficult to shake if the other person, you know, doesn't pay their mortgage or has some sort of other issue. So I think you need to get to know them over a period of time to work out what sort of person they are. It might be an idea to ask them to print their credit record out from Experian. You can do the same and provide it to them, or maybe use Noddle because that's free. I think if you take out limited company mortgages, if they have CCJs, generally, this is not always the case, but generally, if they're not personal mortgages, I've noticed that you can become financially disassociated. And I've actually done it with Rob, because I thought for both our sakes, if anything ever happens, you know, I don't know, a utility supplier manages to put a CCJ on, I don't even know about it. Not that we've got any of that at the moment, any of those sort of issues, but you never completely know. It is probably better not to be connected, you know, at the credit reference agencies, which are Experian, Call Credit, and Equifax. If you go to those three and make sure you're disassociated, then, you know, I think that there's a lot of benefit in doing that. If you're buying in joint names, you can't do that. You're automatically associated. Or if you have a joint personal bank account, you're automatically associated. But if you have a company bank account, and you're shareholders or directors of a company, or you have limited company or LLP borrowings, usually that does not financially associate you, even though you are shareholders and directors of a common limited company or an LLP. That's what I found. Number 7. What is the mistake you've made that's been your most valuable lesson? My God, I've made so many mistakes. Clearly in the old days, it was not having enough control, not understanding what I was buying in areas I don't understand, buying lots of overseas, off-plan, new build. In more recent years, God, I make mistakes all the time. God, there must be a whole stack of stuff. Bringing the right people on and paying them well. I think you can sort of nickel and dime some things. I think when you're doing development projects, it's great to get great materials in and, you know, get them for a very cheap price and go for non-branded stuff. I think with certain tradesmen, yeah, you want to get them in cheap. When you get really good professionals, or, you know, as you scale up, you know, we've got an accountant that we use who is really expensive, but he really, really gets our tax bill down because he's clever. And, you know, instead of your sort of average accountant that just gets the, I don't know, junior accountant to file your go through your tax return and file it, He is the owner of the, of his practice. He goes through every single tax return himself, and he works out how to structure everything, legally and within the rules. He uses all the reliefs, unlike lots of the others. So, if you find the right people, you've got to pay them. I've got a great architect on a project at the moment. He's charging, over £100,000. You've got to pay him. But, he's quick. He's, been really good at working out all the issues with fire and building regs. And he's got us, a really efficient use of space. And so he's great. I've got a great project manager. I'm really happy to pay him because he takes a lot of issues away from me. He reduces my liability. He teaches me a load of stuff. And, over a period of time, I've learned that he's basically probably reduced my professional bill on a project that I'm doing at the moment by about £200,000 by taking people out that are unnecessary and putting jobs with people who are better and maybe aren't ripping me off, which is great. So he gets good money. People who do capital allowances, people who do land remediation relief claims, they save me a load of money. I pay them well. So, in the early days, I would be really trying to save money on everything because, reducing your costs in a business are often one of the simplest ways to increase profit. But I've learned the hard way that is not necessarily the right thing to do. Staff as well, employees, I'd be very, very careful about hiring people who are cheap. But you probably heard the old saying, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And it is true. You get a member of staff in who might be cheap, but who is not particularly good. They will work at a third of the capacity of somebody really good. Not only because maybe they don't work as hard or produce as much, but they have less knowledge and they're just not as efficient or as good at the thing you want to do. So it's not worth using them or not worth having them. And then rehire, if you don't look after them or they're not paid loads and maybe they want to leave, rehiring can cost you minimum £20,000, £30,000. It's not just the sort of recruitment cost, but then you're going to have to retrain and have a good 6-12 months doing that. Cheap solicitors, bane of my life, chasing them and trying to get them to do things. A solicitor I've just used on a remortgage. Granted, they've got the file and they've done work on it before, but since the valuation was produced, they're now drawing down and they've taken 2.5 weeks to draw down from basically getting the full instruction from the bank, which I just find brilliant and amazing. I'm on this one, I'm probably paying them £4 or £5 grand. And if I went to the solicitor I used to use, they maybe charge me £1,500, £2 grand, something like that. But I'd still be here in 3 months' time. They'd be winding me up. As my sort of relationship manager at the bank said yesterday, I'll be full of anguish, and I'm just done with it. So find the right people and pay them well. Number 8. As a Cheshire-based building contractor, how would you approach trying to find an investor with the potential to start a JV? Okay, so I mean, this just applies to a contractor no matter where you are or anyone looking to do a deal. I think you want to go to networking events, you want to get out there, obviously you want to be doing jobs for other investors. And then as you're doing these sort of conversion or building jobs, you want to get the investor on the go and try and sort of show them what you can do, maybe reduce the costs or do it quicker or do them a better job, and then try and persuade them to go into a JV by providing value and generating value to their business. If they feel like you've got a great, eye for design and you're able to sort of add value to the building and add space to the building and generate more income, I think there's a lot of benefit in doing that. I would, that's probably what I would do. Lots of networking. I'd go online, go into, Progressive Property Community Facebook group. A lot of benefit in doing that as well. Contractors have clearly got specialist skills in adding density and getting more apartments or rooms or houses out of a site. I I think if you can add that value to others, they're going to want to JV with you more. Number 9, what would you expect to pay for a shareholders agreement in a JV? Okay, I have a good solicitor in Peterborough, and he'll probably charge as a minimum £1,500 for shareholders agreement. It is totally dependent on how much time the other party spend and how much they pick the shareholders agreement apart and how many times they come back piecemeal rather than sending all the changes in one go. It really can be, sort of £1,000, £1,500, but if it rolls on and on and on, he may charge £4,000, £5,000, £6,000. So I think it's a good idea to get the other party definitely to pay their own solicitor's fees and to make them aware as it's going along how much it is costing them in solicitor's fees because they will be more incentivised to get on with it, get their solicitor to send all the issues back in one go and not drag the thing out. The more you drag it out, the more the cost of the shareholders agreement will go up. But it is a really good idea to use a solicitor to do your shareholders agreement or your joint venture agreement because you probably won't execute it properly if you do it yourself. There'll be clauses that won't be right, you may not even have the right entities on it, and it may not be legally enforceable. So I think there is a lot of value in getting a solicitor to do that. Number 10. Manchester has tens of thousands of pipeline residential units. I guess these are new apartments mainly, and even more proposed in strategic reform proposals. It also has good commercial take-up and pipeline supply. Overall, the city is expanding. Considering all this, what couple of investment strategies do you think will prevail for smaller residential investors, 1 to 50 units, say? Well, we've seen all this before. I remember prior to the last recession, sort of 05, 06, 07, you had Leeds, Manchester, stacks of these apartment buildings going up, far too many apartments, and there was a glut for quite a while. But that always, over time, that goes and it gets sorted. The supply dries up and it fixes itself. But what I would say is if you feel like that's what's happening in Manchester, just don't buy those new apartments. Go and buy the little terraced houses that are 50, 60, 70 years old. They're not building any more of those. The values will be lower. They'll probably be in areas that aren't going to have loads of apartment buildings bought, and the people buying them will be different because they want a Victorian house or an older house versus a new build apartment. So, the house might go to a family. The new build apartment might go to, I don't know, a young couple who want to be in the city centre. They're very different sort of tenant groups. Just don't get caught up in it. Go and buy a different type of stock like that. Or if you're going to do, I don't know, serviced accommodation, maybe you do sort of apartments which are different or older than all the sort of new build ones if you're concerned about that. HMO buildings, well, it's a different market. They're not going to be putting HMO blocks up, maybe student blocks, but not for professionals. So I don't think you've got an issue there either. Just get out of that zone if that's what you're concerned about. Number 11, what is the best way to get the most value from refurb while sticking to a budget? Well, I would get 3 quotes from 3 different builders. I would be very specific about the specification. I'd get ideas from all the builders and your letting agent as to where to spend money and where not to spend money. I would go on to LNPG and join up as a landlord. You'll get your materials way cheaper from them than you will by going into a store, or going into Magnet or whoever, and probably cheaper than your workman can get them for. LNPG is cheap. And then, I would sort of, pay the builder really quickly. I would be really clear about what it is you want. I would be, really ordered about everything with the builder. But I would try not to pay them up front. Just pay for works complete. And you're probably going to get a good relationship where, a builder wants to keep using you. Some of them will be great. Some of them, their pricing will stay good. Some will get complacent. Lots will get complacent and they'll start pushing the prices up. And then you probably need to move on to Builder 2 for a little bit until Builder A becomes a little bit more compliant. and then go back to builder A. Number 12, what is your favourite donut? I guess that's a serious question.
Krispy Kreme?
Yeah, that Krispy Kreme, the one with the is strawberry and sort of cream in the middle. I think that is awesome. And then the other one, I went to Los Angeles and there was this little sort of fresh donut. I'm sure it was called Blue Star, and I suspect they'll be rolling that out. They'll be on some private equity rollout, and I bet that comes over here. They're good as well. Number 13. What things are you looking forward to when you become a dad? I am hopefully going to become a father in around 4 weeks' time. What am I looking forward to? Well, it's my first child, so I don't exactly know what to expect, but I suspect I can get my son into property and I can get him really excited about working out what are good deals and what aren't, what sort of properties he should be buying, how to develop them, and I'm gonna get him when he's at the earliest opportunity, which I think will be 18. I'm going to get him to buy a house. I'll probably lend him the deposit. Well, I'll tell him it's lent, but he might get it in the end. It'll need a lot of refurb, and then I'm going to get him to rent out at least 4 of the rooms in the house to generate an income, to teach him how to manage tenants, how to get that income stream in, and I think it will focus him on having this money so he can go and have a nice time at 18 and spend money. I'm not going to be lavishing him with cash. I'm going to look forward to teaching him all about aviation. I love planes. I fly a helicopter. I'm not sure Gemma's going to let me take him up in that initially. She's sort of putting her foot down about that at the moment. But I'm going to teach him all about it. I suspect as he gets older, there's going to be some added pressure from him as well as myself on Gemma to allow that to happen. And I'm just going to I'm looking forward to getting to know him, and just doing all the stuff that a dad does, which I've seen other people do, but I haven't quite experienced it myself, so I don't know exactly how I'll be. But watch this space. Hopefully all that's going to change in the next few weeks. I would like to get some sleep, but I'm a bit nervous about that. Number 14. Do you ever get bored of working or fed up? Yes. I get stressed. I get fed up and just think, everything's not going right. This is really, really difficult. And often I get in the car and I just go home and I do nothing. Often I just go and get in my hot tub. I just find that as a good way just to ignore everything. And often I just go under the water, and so I can't hear anything and just don't have to listen to anyone. And just sort of a lot of my issues melt away. Every now and again. And if I get a good night's sleep, then I come into the office, feel a lot better, and then I start to work through my issues methodically, and often the day looks better. I do sometimes, think, how much property is enough property, and how long do I want to go on doing this? I had this conversation with Rob 2 or 3 days ago, because sort of once we're all built out, our portfolio value is, it's going to be a pretty good number. And we've got interest in other stuff, other people's sort of properties, and of course we're managing a lot in progressive lets as well. But I often go through those periods where I sort of back off buying for a little bit, but I just can't help but get back involved again, and I'll start tinkering and looking at stuff and sort of getting excited and trying to bid something a bit down. So I just don't think I'm ever going to stop doing this. It can be a little bit sadistic in a way. I know, Rob's had sort of, whilst he's still been here and he's been working, he's been in the office less sort of the last, couple of years. Obviously, he's got kids now. And I've noticed he's sort of come back in again, and he's working really hard. He's doing really long days again now since Christmas. And it's almost like you just can't. You can have a bit of a break, but we all seem to put ourselves back into this position in a slightly sadistic way, where we have all this pressure again, and seem to crave it, and I just seem to want to go and buy a load more buildings and put myself under a load more pressure, which I don't really need to do anymore, but I just can't stop doing it. So I don't think it's ever going to end, but I just have better ways of, or should have better ways of sort of managing my buying and managing the pressure and all the challenges. Question 15. What was the deal that made you feel rich? Well, I'm not sure I feel rich now, and I don't really know what rich is. Rich for me is a moving target, and I used to think, when I get to this level of income or that many properties, I'll feel rich and I've done it. But it's a bit of a moving feast. I've just found when I've always got to those levels, I've just found somebody else who's got a bigger portfolio or making more money, and often I just feel a bit like, surely we could be doing a bit better than we are. Look at what they're doing, or really you should only compete with yourself. But I don't feel rich, and I don't know if I ever will. I don't know. I'm always sort of driving for more. And because it's gradual, because you over time build your wealth and sort of generate more income and all that sort of stuff, it's incremental, and you don't notice it as much. Or I don't. I put it on a spreadsheet now, actually, to keep track. And they're probably the moments where you're a bit more like, I'm getting there, or this is getting closer, or last year was really worth it. That's what I get from sort of those reviews. But never really feel rich. 16. What's the best banking structure for separate companies? Separate or amalgamated, and do the accounting separate? I'm thinking of administrative burden and proving income in a tidy way. So if you're doing big developments, it is a good idea to start SPVs. So you start an individual company for each development. That shields you and the rest of your portfolio from liability and risk, which can be a really good idea. I generally, if we're keeping stock, we're building and we're keeping stock or converting, often I do tend to put it into one entity. I don't like having loads of limited companies because of the administrative burden, the amount of forms I have to fill out, or the accountancy fees. So I try and keep it to a minimum, but if I'm doing bigger projects and I feel there's, a lot of risk, I know something might happen, someone might sue me, something like that, I do often put them in an individual limited company. But my goal over the long term is usually to try and, get them together. Depending on the lender you're going to use, lots of lenders will make you take a personal guarantee, so your liability to them is the same. Some lenders, Lloyds, Barclays, RBS, often they'll take a partial guarantee, personal guarantee, or no guarantee, especially at sort of 60-65% loan to value. So obviously there is benefit then in using SPVs because the development or the investment is completely shielded. Remember, however, though, the buck always stops with you. Maybe on that deal, the bank or whoever's trying to get money from you doesn't get the money, but there'll be a footprint at company's house. There'll be creditors sitting there who have not been paid. Next time you try and get a loan from that bank, they'll probably tell you to go elsewhere. Other banks will be able to see that, and everyone else will be able to see that. So, if you go through company's house and you look at all the companies I've been involved with, all the companies that I've run, I've dissolved some because, the thing I was trying didn't work, or, maybe I've moved properties into another entity, so I haven't need that company anymore or whatever. So I have shut companies down. But if you look at that sort of history and that footprint, every single one of them was shut down with no creditors and no money owing. You won't find one where that has been the case, where I've been a director and shareholder and shut down a company with creditors. So when a bank looks at that history, they never find any bad credit or any reason not to give me the loan at the best rate. And I think there's a lot of value in that. I've seen people go bust, go bankrupt, not want to do a development and send an LLP, into administration or receivership, or, property goes to auction, all that sort of stuff. People get to know about that stuff, and they'll be more wary about doing a deal with you next time. So prepare for the worst. You may get a huge recession. It's sensible to try and protect yourself. But absolutely do your damnedest to stop it happening. Question 17. Are there any risks in buying all your buy-to-lets in one company? I think that was dealt with in the last question. Yes, there are risks. I.e. lenders demanding funds back. Yeah. What is the maximum that you could buy under one limited company? So there is no maximum that you can buy under one limited company. Lenders can demand funds back if you breach their covenants, and lots of lenders will say, well, if the loan to value drops above or goes above 60%, or the rent stress goes above or goes below 150%, then we can demand the money back. Now, in times of recession, when the property values drop, that could easily happen. Your property portfolio drops 25%, lenders can come back to you for the money. Often, if you're paying the mortgage and you behave and you've not done anything wrong, as long as the lender's not in trouble, they probably won't force that position. What happened in the last recession was there were lots of lenders that got into trouble themselves, and then they sent very harsh valuers out as a good excuse to demand the money back from you. If all your buy-to-lets are in one company, well, clearly the buy-to-lets that are charged to that lender, and the fact that lender has a debenture over that limited company will affect it. So yes, it probably is better to try and split them around somewhat to protect yourself. Clearly, if you've got two lenders lending to a limited company, it comes time for the legal process for that to happen, they will also want a debenture, and you need to get the two lenders often to agree to take an equally ranking debenture, which allows them to have a call over the company's other assets. So therein does lie a risk if you've got multiple lenders within one company. Number 18. If I buy investment properties as a limited company as opposed to personally, will this affect my personal borrowing capacity on a mortgage? For example, I know if I have personal buy-to-let mortgages in the background, this will affect my personal borrowing capacity for residential mortgage if I wanted to move house myself. However, if the buy-to-let mortgages are in limited companies, does this mean they'll have no impact on my personal mortgage borrowing? Really want to get started on buy-to-let purchase, but I may also want to move personally in around 5 years. So don't want to shoot myself in the foot. Thanks for any advice, help. Okay, so it can have a bearing, but it will definitely have less bearing if they are in a limited company and away from you versus if they're in your own name. I've done a couple of personal mortgages in the last sort of 5-6 years on two different homes that I live in. And they've wanted to see the whole portfolio, but they've been relatively relaxed around it, especially as they are in limited companies. They often want to see the rent, make sure they work, see what is in the background, but because they're not in my own name, I think it's made it a lot easier. That isn't to say that if you've got a load of properties that are very highly leveraged in a limited company, not cash flowing, they won't take that into account, because they will. They will want to see what other properties you've got in the background. But it is, I'd say, a lot less of an issue if the properties are in a limited company or an LLP and away from you. And critically, they don't usually show up on your credit file. The properties that I have in limited companies the mortgages don't show up on my credit file. Only the mortgages I have on buy-to-lets in my own name, they're the ones that show up on the credit file, and the lender tends to get more bothered about them. Just seems to be the way it is. Question 19. How far in are we, Harry?
There's only about 3 or 4 more questions.
Okay.
You can be as quick as you want. If you want to speed it up, then
Fine. Question 19. Before JVing and refinancing existing properties, how did you find purchase of additional properties? Before JVing and refinancing existing properties, how did you find... Oh, did you fund the purchase? Okay, so clearly, JVing and, I had a little bit of a pot, not a huge pot, which I started with, and used that to roll over. Obviously, we have got a training business. We do make money out of that, and that does throw some cash off, to allow us to buy properties. But, sort of in the early days, obviously Rob didn't have any money, so he JV'd with me and I used my money to finance the purchases with Rob. And, you could do the same thing. You could find someone who's got cash, who's got deposits, and get that rolling with them. So I think there's a hell of a lot of value in doing that. 20. Best first commercial project for experienced vanilla buy-to-let landlords with up to 150k cash funds. Yes, I do. I think I'd probably do a high-end HMO. I'd probably convert it. I'd maybe do 1 or 2 cluster flats. I'd get really high yield. If you're buying sort of Midlands and North, you'd probably get 15%. I'll put all en suites in. 150k cash will probably let you with some development finance. Maybe do 6 rooms or 12 rooms, something like that. You'll have a nice little development there, which will throw off a lot of income. That's what I would probably do. Number 21. What do you think the longevity of deals sourcing packaging is as a business model? Well, I don't think there's any sort of time limit on it. I think, you can do it. You need to be registered with the property ombudsman to do it. You act like an estate agent. I think you need to get experienced in it. I think you need to get good at it. You need to find genuine deals. You need to find ways of securing them and securing the investor's commitment with some funds, maybe a deposit. And I think you need to sort of watch the best and get really good at it. I've done it a bit in the past. I don't do it so much these days because honestly, the best deals that I find, I just want to buy them myself. I just want to buy them myself, I want to put them in the portfolio, and I want to get the income from them. Certainly in the earlier days, we got income from sourcing deals for people, and that helped us grow our portfolio. So you do it when you haven't got any choice, and it helps you grow your portfolio and grow your sort of business. So what's right for me now or what was right for me then isn't necessarily right for you in your circumstance now. 22. Are single lets in semi-decent areas with gross yield of 10% actually a better bet than HMOs over time due to fewer overheads, hassle and void periods? That is very much dependent on where you are, what type of HMOs or single lets you're doing. I do both. I like, doing sort of high-end HMOs in the centre of our city because the voids I don't find are too much of an issue. As long as they're nice and they're nice spec, I can keep the voids down. I've had HMOs in other areas with LHA and not great tenants, and it was a bloody nightmare. The refurb costs, the voids, fights, the police putting doors in, prostitution, drugs, all that made it a complete nightmare. And I wouldn't do it for all the tea in China. So I think it depends what exactly your model is and where you're doing it. But yeah, single lets are great, and you'll probably end up with a bigger capital base by rolling your money over through single lets and more cash flow through doing HMOs. So if you can make the two together, the single lets will make you very rich in the long term because obviously you're going to get capital growth. And you'll get capital growth on the HMOs, but if you've got a couple of HMOs and they're worth 300 grand versus, 10 single lets that are worth 1.1 million, the single lets are going to create a lot more equity in the long run for you. Question 23. What do you think of the proposed tax changes that will mean that landlords will have to submit figures to HMRC 5 times per annum? Personally, I think it's crazy. Well, yes, I tend to agree with you. Making tax digital, as this is known, looks to me like HMRC sort of getting more frequent returns from you so they can see a more up-to-date snapshot of what you're doing. I suspect they believe it will generate more tax for them. That's probably the incentive for doing it. It will, you know, if you don't do management accounts and you don't know how your business is running, it will force you to do those more frequently, and you'll see exactly how your business is performing, you know, on a more up-to-date basis, which might be good. But yeah, it's just more administrative burden, isn't it? You know, I think we've got 11 account staff upstairs. All they're doing all day is basically working for HMRC, and we pay them. Because all they're doing is putting loads and loads of numbers on spreadsheets or into Sage to tell HMRC how much VAT we need to pay them, how much corporation tax, you know, and you know, all the other sort of taxes that we pay, payroll, you know, all the taxes that the employees pay, the income tax and the national insurance, and I suppose this is more of the same. I don't know, we haven't actually seen the reality of it. I think there's some talk that it will reduce that burden because it will be more digital, but don't hold your breath. Question 24, final question. What are your predictions for the UK economy and property confidence in the next few years, given the slowdown in the US and Chinese economies? Well, I think I dealt with that in the early part of this podcast, stroke video. Difficulties faced in Europe and, of course, Brexit. Does Dyson are leaving the UK, foreign car manufacturers moving out of the city, bigwigs shifting more to Europe bother you? Well, it's not a good thing, is it? Dyson, I would have thought, has gone to Singapore primarily because of tax. Clearly, he said that it's because he's making lots of cars, or is going to make lots of electric cars for the Asian market, which may also be true. But wouldn't you want to operate out of Singapore with a much lower corporate tax rate? And you know, they can probably shelter money over there. Yes, Brexit is blatantly, all the uncertainty around it is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for business. These car factories closing down, it's not just because of Brexit. It clearly is because you know, their numbers have reduced significantly in terms of their sales, you know, and diesel's coming to an end. So there are a lot of factors there, but Brexit doesn't help, does it? It's just another nail in the coffin. And the uncertainty that creates stops businesses from investing and probably makes the decision to go home or go somewhere else with more stability easier. You know, do I think that Brexit is going to create a major issue for property investors in the long term? No. Will we get through all this stuff? Absolutely. You know, is the UK economy more effective, efficient, and grow at a higher rate than the rest of Europe? Absolutely. You know, I think it's over the last 10 years we've grown in the 40-something% range, whereas a lot of Europe, probably dragged down by Southern Europe, has grown in the sort of 20% range. Clearly, the Northern European countries like Germany, you know, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, are you know, a lot more productive, and you know, our economic growth rates are a lot higher, unemployment rates are higher, wage growth and wage levels are higher. That's not going away. You know, yeah, some city bigwigs leave London. Unilever decides to go and set up, I don't know, I think it was in Holland. You know, maybe some banks decide to go and set up in Europe because they need to stay in the EU for passporting reasons, or because they're dealing with other parts of the world that are doing business through the EU. That absolutely is the case, you know, and I'm sure it's harmed London in some way, but you have to remember that, you know, London wasn't just built because of the EU. London, you know, has evolved as this major international finance centre, which probably largely evolved, you know, through the days of the empire, you know, the colonies. all of this major trading which we did all around the world, all these, the government has got all these offshore tax jurisdictions which basically we set up, the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, Bermuda, there are a whole load of these different jurisdictions around the world which exist because in many ways their business is filtered through London, and that generates a lot of business for London. These sort of offshore jurisdictions are under the control of Whitehall in London. They're like county councils. So inevitably, they're going to be doing their business through London. All those staff, all those employees, all those companies, all those linkages, they're built up over many hundreds of years. They're not suddenly going to go away. They're sort of interlinked and knit together. So, of course, in the medium to long term, we'll all be absolutely fine. But you've just got to get through this sort of period of reduced certainty and reduced growth. And then crack on. Thank you for listening to the podcast and watching this video. Hope you found it of value. It's been Mark Homer for Mark My Words.